Welcome to the Tudor Dixon Podcast. I am excited today because we have Erika Donald here with us to talk about education. And just so you know, Erika is a guest faculty member for the Leadership Institute's School Board Leaders programs, as well as the CEO of Optima Ed, an education experience company dedicated to expanding high-quality school choice. And she also happens to be married to someone that we've had on this podcast before, whose name is Congressman Byron Donald. And together they have 3 boys, which means education is not only her professional passion, but also her personal passion. Because as a mom of 4 girls, I know what it's like to want to make sure that your kids are getting the best possible education. So Erika, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. And so you can tell us how to make sure that our kids are getting the best education, because you have a lot of really interesting things going on. I mean, there's so much to touch on. I think that it's interesting to me because after COVID, a lot of us opened our eyes to the fact that education might not be exactly what we thought. And there's a lot of alternative forms of education that people might not know about. So if you can kind of like dig into that and tell us what you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. 12 years ago is where my education journey began. I was in investment management for 20 years, had no thought to education except buying a house in the neighborhood where I wanted my kids to go to school, like a lot of middle-class families do. But I learned pretty quickly that when you have 4 girls or 3 boys, not every one of them is going to learn the same. And so I knew I had to find something a little bit different for my middle child. And I discovered school choice when I found that I didn't have it. I couldn't afford some of the private schools. I paid a premium for this house, but I discovered classical education, a small private school, and that really started me on a journey of trying to make this type of education available to as many families as possible, helping to start charter schools. I served on a school board for a while, hoping to change the public school system. I gave up on that pretty quickly, started Optima Ed, where we've been able to open now starting on 6 classical charter schools, including Optima Academy Online, which is a nationwide virtual classical school, the world's first VR school, available to families everywhere, and a growing number of families tuition free. I truly believe that to fix our education system, we need a free market in education. And that's what at the Leadership Institute, as I'm traveling around talking to families, they want options, but the things that they really want, high quality, a school that aligns with their values, can only come about with a free market enterprise system that's going to increase quality and access and innovation in our education arena for everyone.
It's been interesting because we've seen a lot of states in the past couple of years change over. I think COVID really started that with governors across the country. Governors started to say, gosh, we need to give people an option, because they saw their school boards having more power than they had as governor and shutting schools down. And then I know in Arizona, at the time, Governor Ducey said, if your school is shutting down, we're going to help you to go to a different school. And that kind of started that whole push toward a lot of different states saying, man, if your kid isn't learning, like you said, if you have one kid that isn't learning well in that school, why shouldn't you as the parent get to choose the business that's going to make your child successful? Because school, ultimately it is a business, and yet it doesn't have to perform like a business. If it doesn't perform, it still gets money, and it doesn't make any sense.
Right. The public school monopoly is simply not working. It hasn't worked for decades. And you're right, it's not operated like a business, certainly not in the way that they spend tax dollars. We look at how much it's being spent and the results, which are abysmal right now, frankly, versus what people are getting out of their ESA dollars or out of the charter school dollars that are spent that are a fraction. And no business is operating that way. But most importantly, and you mentioned COVID and how much people woke up, the teachers union showed us who they are in COVID. They don't put students first. They put unions first. They put adults first. And the curtain was pulled back on the low quality curriculum and teaching and learning that's happening in our schools. Parents were outraged. I heard from many of them about the low quality of the curriculum, and they're recognizing the curriculum crisis. And then finally, what I mentioned earlier, the misalignment of values in this monopolistic system where parents are forced by rule of law to send their children all day, every day. And those people were giving out information that was contrary to the values that the parents had at home, cultural indoctrination, political indoctrination. We're looking at changing pronouns and forcing children into mature conversations that they're not ready for. And so
I had never even thought about it, though, from that perspective, that you really are legally forced to send your child to this school every day, to this building every day, and what they're going to teach them, you have little say over. And I thought it was interesting that you said you started with the school board because you thought you could have an impact on your public school, and quickly realized that that wasn't going to be the answer for you. Because I think some people are getting to the point now where we've had a lot of this activism. So a lot of people have joined the school board, and they aren't having the results that they were hoping to have. And so I think you give them hope by saying, well, if that doesn't work, there are other options.
Well, absolutely. And I'm really proud of what we've done since I left the school board with Optima. But it's also why I joined the Leadership Institute as a guest faculty, and why we are traveling the country to train school board members on how to be effective. We do have more school board members on our side, if you will, than ever before, thanks to even groups like Moms for Liberty, Leadership Institute, that's helping get these candidates elected. But once you're elected, you need training and support so you can be effective. Model policies, things like that, that are going to allow these school board members to actually have more of an influence than I had in my 4 years when I was in the minority. And it literally took me 4 years to get even to my first priority in my campaign. And even then, they just stonewalled me every chance they got. But there is a way to make change as school board members. And I'm really proud of the work that the Leadership Institute is doing to help make that happen.
So tell us a little bit about a VR school, because I know a lot of people came out of COVID and went, man, I don't ever want to be on something that sounds like an online school again. Now, a lot of people also don't realize that we had online K through 12 before COVID that was very successful, but those are specifically trained to be online. And so when people get a little bit nervous about an online type of school now, I think they need to understand that that is different than just taking your public school that's never been online and trying to convert them overnight.
Yeah, it is the difference between emergency pandemic learning and truly intentional, high quality virtual options. And when we went online during COVID, I was operating a brick and mortar classical school. I did not have an online school. And I went to the shelf looking for something to purchase for my students to replicate what we were doing in person and keep that high quality experience. Frankly, there were some good online options, but nothing classical, nothing liberal arts that I wanted. So we created our own program that really replicated the in-person experience, kept that rigorous curriculum, the high quality classical nature of what we do in person and online. And we had parents contacting us saying, we want to participate in your online program. We hear how good it is, even though our children don't go to your school. So we decided at the end of the pandemic, when in Florida, thankfully, we all went back in person, that we had about 100 students whose families wanted to stay online, because just as many families who say, I cannot take this anymore, and I was one of them, my kids need to go back to school. I have one child out of 3 who really thrived being able to work at his own pace online without the distractions of in-person schooling. And so I think, just like we've been talking about, parents need different options. As long as it is a high quality option with well-qualified teachers who are passionate about their subject matter, and the curriculum is solid, most importantly, online options like Optima Academy Online can be a great asset for families and a great option when they don't have others. Now, when it comes to VR, if you think about the checkerboard of faces that was live learning, if you were lucky enough to get live learning during the pandemic, parents are managing 25 different classrooms. It's completely impossible for educators to do. When you have on a VR headset, our students are in a classroom with their teacher and their peers. And
that's what I was wondering. I'm like, VR learning, are they actually feeling like they put those goggle things on and they feel like they're right there? That is so neat.
We have a whole campus and that they do classrooms inside and outdoors. But even better, we immerse them in experiences such as going to ancient Rome when they're learning about history, or they go to the moon and actually watch a lunar landing. The one I'm most proud of is our constitutional experience, where we've built Independence Hall, and they can actually go through the constitutional, the founding fathers, their debates over the Constitution, and feel like they were there in person for what actually occurred at Independence Hall for the founding of our country. It gives me chills just to talk about it. So there's a lot that we can do with technology on our side of the aisle, if you will, because the progressives are taking off with it in ways that we don't really want for our children. But we can create a really high quality experience in virtual reality and digitally that parents can be involved in with their children at home if they so choose, and if that's the best option for them.
Is that available to people across the country? Is that only in your area? How does that work?
We are nationwide now. We are continuing to work on being tuition free nationwide. So we are tuition free in Florida and Arizona. We are on the education savings account platforms in other states, including North Carolina, Iowa, New Hampshire. Every day, my team is working hard to get us on platforms or get the funding available, because I truly believe that it should be free, a high quality education option for every single family in the country. I believe so much in the classical model and in school choice that this is my way of trying to make a difference there.
That's awesome. I love that. One other area that I wanted to get to with you in public education, because you've been outspoken about the uncontrollable influx of migrants at our border. Both you and your husband have been outspoken about this, but you bring up some points that I think a lot of us have not considered when we think about people coming across the border. And that is that these kids are coming into schools with our students, and these children don't speak English. And just the amount of resources that get taken away from kids in that classroom because there are so many students suddenly who come in. English is not their first language. They're trying to learn English. They're trying to learn what they're being taught in class. And those resources are being stretched, because how can a teacher who has never taught a student that doesn't know English, be able to really prioritize the students that are American citizens when you have all of these migrant students who are not American citizens, who are not vaccinated, I would like to point out also, and they don't speak English?
This is a huge problem that people are not talking about when it comes to the immigration crisis our country is facing. You have perhaps 1 million children who have come across the border that the Supreme Court says that our schools have to serve. And some districts, especially urban districts, have had to hire more social workers, more English language learner teachers, more guidance counselors, and of course, more teachers themselves, even though there's a teacher shortage already, to service these students. But studies show that as students who do not speak the native language, who are behind academically, are coming into these classrooms, that resources are diverted, not just stretched, but diverted away from American students, the families of tax-paying Americans who are paying for these schools. They are losing out on these precious resources in order to service those who are more behind. We know that our students are already too far behind to compete globally. They need all the resources that they can get. And unfortunately, because Biden has allowed this crisis, we're going to see an effect on the academic performance of our schools even more than we have in the past.
Well, I mean, we are seeing a significant effect. Let me pick on Minnesota for a second. That is Ilhan Omar's home state. That is they have a large migrant population there, and it continues to grow on a regular basis. A large group from Somalia in Minnesota. And I mean, to the point where Minneapolis has an entire section that is now just called Little Somalia. And 75 schools last year had a 0% proficiency rate in math. That is 4% of the schools there had a 0% proficiency rate in math. And this is not to pick on immigrants. This is to say these are folks who are coming in and they don't speak the language. And there is nothing in the public school system that says, okay, when this happens, now we're going to do this. And these are not folks that are paying the taxes to be there.
Right. And that no one is increasing their budgets either to accommodate. In fact, we see New York City decreasing budgets in order to accommodate the immigrants' housing and medical care. So no new information or new budget is going into the schools to accommodate the needs of these immigrants. And so not only is the teacher attention, which is the biggest resource that our students have, diverted to students who need that additional help, but resources certainly are being diverted as well. You mentioned Minnesota, in Baltimore, 40% of the high schools have zero proficiency. I mean, can you imagine sending a child into a school environment where not a single child in their entire school is reading or doing mathematics on grade level? There are
But it's robbery on so many levels, because you are robbing these children of an education. So therefore you are robbing them of a future, and you're robbing the residents of their tax dollars. Because like I said, it's not run like a business, because a business is not allowed to fail. If a business fails, it fails. There's no safety net for a business. But these schools are run where they're not held accountable to anything. In fact, they even lower scoring so that they can say, oh, actually, these kids are passing. They're not passing.
Right.
This is ridiculous.
Yes, we saw in Portland and in that area, they eliminated the need to pass a proficiency test in order to graduate high school. I mean, why are we calling them graduates? We should just call them finishers, because they sat in a seat for 13 years from K to 12 and then they left. But we don't know if they read, and we don't know if they do math. In fact, we know that they don't based on past experience and performance. And we see it in New York as well. They tried to lower the proficiency rates for reading because the scores were so low, embarrassingly low. They want to move the bar lower so that they can say, oh, yes, there are this many students above the bar, when we know that that bar is already too low when you look at how we're performing against other countries. We are near the bottom now for K-12 academic performance. And so we need to get serious as a country about academic excellence. We need both our leaders at the federal level and at state levels across the country to make this a priority. But most importantly, as you and I both know, the thing that really changes things is when parents continue to rise up and demand options, demand accountability and transparency by their local schools and by their state governments. That's really the thing that starts the change. But wouldn't it be great if we had leaders across our country who actually made this into a priority instead of making excuses for the teachers' unions?
Well, absolutely. How much of this, though, is also if we had leaders that would stop the influx? I mean, we're looking at 10% of our students now not speaking English, 10% speaking another language and learning English while they are in the classroom. And now we're seeing historically, it's been mostly Spanish, but now we're seeing Russian, Ukrainian, Arabic, all of these kids coming in from other countries not speaking English. This, to me, as we see the world at war, as we see more anti-Semitism rise in our universities, and we saw just what we saw last week with the presidents of the universities refusing to say that calling for genocide is harassment. I mean, just a harassment, that this is against the code of conduct. That's all they had to say. Yeah, you can't call for the murder of an entire group of people. And they were like, well, depends on the context of genocide. It's like, what? That word means one thing. There's a context in the word.
It was so shocking to watch them say that with a straight face. And then when Congresswoman Stefanik kept asking them again and again, hoping that they would click and give the opportunity to say, no, we actually don't want our students calling for genocide of Jews on our campuses. They refused to say it until after they talked to their crisis management teams back home, right? And now they're trying to save their jobs, but every single one of them should resign. I'm so glad that they were exposed, but this has been going on at our college campuses for so long. And now, frankly, it is infiltrating our K-12 schools as well, because it's coming through the teachers' colleges, right? That mindset that we saw on full display in Congress this week with those university presidents, that's what's being taught in our teachers' colleges. And those teachers are in our K-12 schools. And regardless of what these laws are at the state level saying you can't say this and you can't say that, no one is in those classrooms to hold those teachers accountable. And nothing makes the case for school choice more than that, if you're, in my opinion.
Well, I will say, with the university, I talked to a gentleman just a couple of days ago. This totally, I guess it put it in a different perspective for me, because we keep hearing about Asian discrimination on college campuses, and that Asian students have been, even though they have the highest grades, they're not getting the places at our Ivy League universities. And he said, I look at my son, and he was Indian American. He said, I look at my son, and in the time that he was in high school, I started up a new tech company. He said he worked twice as hard as I did. He gave up all of his time with his friends. He was busting his butt on a regular basis just to get in, and he squeaked in. And when he got there, he said there were kids that hardly had to work at all, but because they were under the label of people of color, they got into Stanford. And he said, he called me and he said, Dad, there are dorms that I'm not allowed to go in because I'm not a person of color. And he said, this is driving these young people for the first time away from liberalism. He said, I am a liberal, but I've been driven away from this, because he said, I cannot believe how horribly my son has been discriminated against. He said, my niece her life goal was to get to Harvard. And he said she entered Harvard as a trans man and was welcomed into Harvard, did all of the work, wrote the essay, I'm a trans man. He said on day one, she was in trans studies as a trans man. And on day two, she was in computer science as herself. And he said, and the reason she did that was because if they're going to mess with her this way, even though she's the best qualified, she's going to play the game. And I was like, man, it's so sad that is where we are. But it's very interesting to me that young people have started to say, I have to do something to hide who I am to get where I deserve to be. That's pretty sad.
And not hide who I am as a bad person, hide the bad things I've done in my past. I mean, we can all
hide my ethnicity.
No, but hide who I am from my ethnicity, from my history, from my just normal sexuality, like all of these crazy things, because you have to be countercultural. You have to be different. You have to be, liberal in many cases in order to be appealing to these opportunities that every student should have based on their merits and their hard work and their intelligence. It's so sad that the country that we live in, America, this meritocracy, has turned into this, and we really cannot let it go. We can't let this happen. And I think that the fight is in our people, right? The fight is in parents who see this, the same ones that you just heard from. It's not left or right even. People on both sides of the aisle are seeing this idiocy, seeing the anti-Semitism on display, seeing the hypocrisy and frankly, the racism that is taking place. And I think we're going to continue to see an uprising against it. We're going to see it in next year's election, I believe, and I would predict. And I'm really happy to see that, but it is horrifying to see where we are in many ways.
It is. In fact, when we had your husband on, Congressman Byron Donald, he was talking about the fact that liberals you have experienced racism being in an interracial marriage from liberals. Oh, how bizarre is that?
Far more than any time in our history. We met in college at Florida State University. So we've been together about 23 years now. And even in what I would call sort of the deep South in Tallahassee, Florida, North Florida, all the way to Naples when we moved here, which was very white and, very much older population, we did not experience racism in the way that we do today with him as a Republican congressman. You should see some of the comments and memes and things that people put out there are absolutely despicable, but it doesn't come from the right. It doesn't even come from older generations that you might think have some antiquated viewpoints. It's absolutely coming from just, if they were all in one category, it would be the liberal left.
That is so crazy to think, but that racism seems to be the new norm in the political arena on the left. And I was thinking about this earlier today. I'm like, gosh, for years, they have been calling us the racists and the anti-Semites, and man, have they been exposed in the past few months. And I thought, gosh, so oftentimes, when you have someone that is, one of those toxic people in your life, you're told time and time again, usually they're projecting what they're saying about you is who they actually are. And I don't think we could have even fully unpacked the level to which they are racist and anti-Semitic. And yet here we are seeing it today. And I just want you to know that we appreciate you and your family and everything that you guys do to fight against that kind of stuff.
Well, it's truly an honor to be in the position that we're in, to be able to make a difference, for Byron to do so in Washington, D.C., and for me, just in my corner of the world here when it comes to education, being able to be on shows like yours. Appreciate what you do to give this a platform and talk about these important issues. And I think it empowers other people to be courageous, to step out, whether it means running for office or just being an activist and speaking to your friends and neighbors about the things that are important. I think you find a lot more synergy regardless of what side of the aisle you think they sit on, because this is just common sense stuff and we're going to lose our country otherwise. So I just encourage everyone to be courageous, stand for what you believe in, and don't be afraid to talk to people about it.
It's so true. We've been talking about this so much lately, just about don't put all your faith even in government. I mean, we've never put our faith in government. It is about you. And you can join government and have an impact that way. But if you choose not to, in a capitalist society, you have a lot of power. Your dollar has a lot of power. And so you can stop. I mean, we were just talking about Disney the other day and all of these actors that are in the Marvel movies who have come out against Republicans. And I'm like, it's not even that they have this woke content and what they're doing. It's that these people who we go to because they're professional entertainers, I mean, that's their job.
Right.
Then they go out and they say terrible things about us. If you say something terrible about me, I don't really want to pay to have you entertain me, which is your professional job.
This goes back
but you kind of ruin your professional job.
It does. And thank goodness now there's a lot more competition for entertainment and we can choose to go elsewhere. It used to not be that way where you had limited options. And now you've got some amazing Christian organizations developing movies. You've got Dinesh D'Souza doing great things with his production and others. So we finally have more of a less monopolistic market when it comes to entertainment, and we can vote with our feet. And I can only hope that continues to happen in education, and we see the same free market impact where people can vote with their feet when things do not align with their values or the quality that they expect. And that's what we're hoping for in Florida with the universal ESAs. I know it's happening in Arizona now as well, and we've only just begun. That's
something that we've also been talking about with anytime government gets involved in something, it doesn't seem to be successful. So whether it's the VA and helping veterans who are wounded or suffering from PTSD or education, it seems like it's we the people who do it better. So I appreciate what you do every single day. Tell our audience again how they can look up your schools and understand a little more about it.
Right. We're optimaed.com. And if you're looking nationwide for the online program, it's optimaacademy.online. And you can sign up there, find out if you qualify for tuition-free option, optimaacademy.online. And of course, the Leadership Institute, if you are looking to become an activist or run for school board, or if you're an existing school board member that wants training, Leadership Institute is where you want to go to sign up for our services there.
Wonderful. Erika Donald, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining us on the Tudor Dixon Podcast. For this episode and others, check out TudorDixonPodcast.com. You can subscribe right there or head over to the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And join us next time on the Tudor Dixon Podcast. Have a blessed day.